Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Robert Sullivan stood in his mahogany-paneled home office, staring at the wall of commendations and certificates that told the story of a successful life. 22 years in Army Special Forces, decorated veteran of 3 tours, followed by 15 years building Sullivan Security Consultants into the most respected private security firm on the East Coast. At 45, he had everything a man could want: a thriving business, a beautiful home in the prestigious Willowbrook neighborhood, and what everyone believed was the perfect family. His wife Diana, 38, was the envy of every woman at the country club. A former model turned interior designer, she had transformed their Georgian colonial into a showcase that graced the pages of Architectural Digest. Her golden hair and emerald eyes still turned heads wherever she went, just as they had when Robert first met her at a charity gala 12 years ago. Their son Kyle, now 16, was everything Robert had hoped for in an heir. Star quarterback of the varsity football team, honor roll student, and already being recruited by Division I colleges. The boy had inherited his father's tactical mind and his mother's charisma, a dangerous combination that Robert had been carefully cultivating. But Robert Sullivan hadn't survived 2 decades in the world's most dangerous places by accepting things at face value. His training had taught him to observe, to question, to never trust completely. These skills had served him well in business, helping him build an empire by anticipating threats and neutralizing them before they could materialize. It was these same skills that had first alerted him to the subtle changes in his perfect life 6 months ago. Diana's phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The new workout schedule that kept her away from home for hours at a time. The expensive lingerie hidden in the back of her closet, pieces he'd never seen her wear. Kyle's increasingly secretive behavior, his sudden reluctance to discuss school or friends. Robert had initially dismissed these observations as paranoia, the occupational hazard of a man who made his living protecting others from betrayal. But when Diana started working late 3 nights a week on a major project that never seemed to progress, his instincts screamed danger. The first rule of tactical operations: gather intelligence before taking action. Robert's company employed some of the best surveillance specialists in the business. Men and women who had learned their trade in the CIA, NSA, and military intelligence. It would have been easy to have Diana followed, her phones tapped, her every movement monitored. But Robert Sullivan was no ordinary husband. He was a man who understood that true power came from controlling the battlefield, not simply reacting to it. So he had chosen a different approach. He would conduct his own surveillance, using skills honed in the mountains of Afghanistan and the streets of Baghdad. He would become the hunter, and his wife would never know she was prey. The hunt had begun on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Diana had announced she would be working late again, this time on an emergency consultation for a wealthy client in the city. Robert had nodded sympathetically, kissed her cheek, and wished her luck. Then he had waited 30 minutes before following her. The GPS tracker he'd installed in her BMW led him not to any client's home, but to the Grandview Hotel on the outskirts of the city. Through the telephoto lens of his camera, he had watched his wife of 12 years walk hand in hand with Trevor Walsh into the lobby. Trevor Walsh. Robert knew the name well. A prominent attorney, partner at Walsh, Morrison and Associates, divorced father of 2. More importantly, he was the lawyer representing Diana's biggest client, Harrison Industries, in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Robert had met him at several social functions over the past year, had shaken his hand, had even shared drinks with him at the country club. The betrayal cut deep, but not as deep as what Robert discovered 2 weeks later. Kyle knew. The revelation had come during what should have been a routine father-son conversation about college applications. Kyle had mentioned, almost casually, that his mother's work meetings with Mr. Walsh were helping her expand her business. The boy's tone had been carefully neutral, but Robert heard the underlying message clearly. His son was not only aware of the affair, but was actively covering for his mother. In that moment, sitting in his son's bedroom surrounded by football trophies and academic awards, Robert Sullivan felt something inside him die. The family he had built, the legacy he had planned to leave behind, the future he had sacrificed so much to secure, all of it was a lie. That night, alone in his study while Diana claimed to be at yoga class and Kyle studied upstairs, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He opened his secure laptop and began typing, his fingers moving with the same precision he had once used to plan military operations. At the top of the document, he wrote a single word: retribution. Robert Sullivan was not a man who forgave betrayal. In the Special Forces, betrayal meant death for you and your team. In business, betrayal meant ruin. In marriage, betrayal meant war. And Robert Sullivan had never lost a war. Chapter 2. The Art of War. The next 3 months were a masterclass in patience and planning. Robert maintained his perfect husband facade while systematically dismantling the lives of those who had betrayed him. Every morning, he kissed Diana goodbye with the same affection he had shown for 12 years. Every evening, he helped Kyle with homework and discussed the boy's future with genuine fatherly pride. But behind the mask, Robert Sullivan was preparing for battle. His first step was intelligence gathering. Using resources from his security company, Robert compiled detailed dossiers on both Diana and Trevor. He learned that their affair had begun 8 months ago, during the initial meetings for the Harrison Industries case. He discovered that they had been meeting twice a week at various hotels throughout the city, always paying cash, always using false names. More disturbing was the scope of Kyle's involvement. The boy wasn't merely covering for his mother. He was actively facilitating the affair. Kyle had been providing alibis, lying to Robert about Diana's whereabouts, and even acting as a lookout during some of their meetings. The betrayal ran deeper than adultery. It was a conspiracy that included his own son. Robert's investigation revealed something else. Diana and Trevor weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. Bank records showed that Diana had been secretly moving money into offshore accounts. Real estate searches revealed that Trevor had been looking at properties in non-extradition countries. They weren't just betraying him. They were preparing to disappear with his money and his son. But Robert's most shocking discovery came from monitoring Kyle's communications. The boy wasn't just helping his mother. He was actively working against his father. Text messages revealed that Kyle had been feeding information about Robert's business to Diana, who was passing it along to Trevor. The attorney was using inside knowledge about Sullivan Securities operations to poach clients and steal contracts. The betrayal was complete. His wife, his son, and their lover had formed an alliance designed to destroy him financially and emotionally before abandoning him entirely. Robert's military training had taught him that the best defense was a devastating offense. If they wanted to play games, he would show them what real strategy looked like. Phase 1 of his plan involved financial warfare. Using his company's forensic accounting team, Robert began tracing every dollar Diana had moved, every account she had opened, every asset she had tried to hide. What she didn't know was that as the primary account holder on all their joint assets, Robert had the legal authority to freeze everything with a single phone call. Phase 2 was psychological warfare. Robert began leaving subtle signs that he suspected something without directly confronting anyone. A newspaper article about private investigators left on the kitchen counter. A casual mention of a friend whose wife had been cheating. Small comments about the importance of family loyalty. He watched as Diana and Kyle grew increasingly nervous, their secret meetings becoming more frequent and desperate. Phase 3 was the most dangerous. Robert began planning their destruction. Trevor Walsh's law firm was built on reputation and client trust. Robert's investigation had uncovered several ethical violations in Trevor's handling of the Harrison Industries case: conflicts of interest, improper communications with opposing counsel, and misuse of client funds for personal expenses. A well-timed anonymous tip to the State Bar Association would destroy Trevor's career and likely result in criminal charges. Diana's business was more vulnerable than she realized. Her interior design company operated under licenses and permits that required annual renewals. A few carefully placed complaints about substandard work, combined with documentation of her fraudulent billing practices, would result in the suspension of her business license and potential civil lawsuits. Kyle's future was equally fragile. The boy's college applications were pending, his football scholarships were contingent on maintaining his grades and staying out of trouble. A single academic cheating scandal or disciplinary action would destroy years of work and planning. But Robert wanted more than professional destruction. He wanted them to understand the full cost of betrayal. He wanted them to experience the same devastation they had planned for him. He wanted them to lose everything they valued, just as they had tried to take everything from him. As April turned to May, Robert finalized his preparations. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, every escape route blocked. His targets had no idea that their hunter had become their executioner. The endgame would begin with a single phone call to the police, reporting a crime that would shatter their world and expose their betrayal to everyone they knew. But first, Robert needed to ensure that when the hammer fell, there would be no escape, no mercy, and no forgiveness. Robert Sullivan was about to teach his family the most important lesson of their lives. Betrayal has consequences, and some sins are unforgivable. Chapter 3. Setting the Trap. May 15th would later be remembered as the day Robert Sullivan's patience finally paid off. For weeks, he had been monitoring Diana and Trevor's communications, waiting for the perfect opportunity to spring his trap. That opportunity came in the form of a weekend getaway they had planned to a cabin in the mountains, a romantic retreat where they intended to finalize their plans for starting a new life together. What they didn't know was that Robert had been 3 steps ahead of them since the beginning. The cabin belonged to one of Trevor's law partners, a remote property that the couple believed would provide perfect privacy for their clandestine activities. Robert had visited the location twice in the past month, using his military reconnaissance skills to map every approach, every escape route, and every vulnerability. The cabin was isolated, accessible only by a single mountain road, with no cell phone coverage and no witnesses for miles. It was perfect for what Robert had planned. That Friday evening, Diana announced she would be spending the weekend at a spa retreat with her friend Caroline, a story she had used before. Kyle claimed he would be staying at his teammate Brandon's house for a football training camp. Both lies were delivered with practiced ease, their eyes never quite meeting Robert's as they spoke. Robert nodded and smiled, playing his part in their deception. "Have fun, honey," he told Diana, kissing her cheek. "You deserve some relaxation." To Kyle, he offered the standard fatherly advice. "Work hard, but don't overdo it. And remember to call if you need anything." As soon as they left, Robert activated Phase 4 of his plan. The beauty of his strategy lay in its simplicity. He didn't need to catch them in the act or confront them directly. Instead, he would use their own betrayal as the weapon to destroy them. The crime he was about to report to the police was real, but not in the way anyone would expect. 3 months earlier, during one of his surveillance operations, Robert had discovered that Trevor and Diana weren't just planning to steal his money, they had already begun. Using Kyle as an inside source, they had gained access to Robert's business accounts and had been systematically embezzling funds through a series of fraudulent consulting contracts. The scheme was sophisticated, involving shell companies and offshore transfers, but Robert's forensic accountants had traced every transaction. The theft amounted to nearly $2 million, a federal crime that carried serious prison time. But Robert wasn't interested in sending them to prison. That would be too easy, too clean. He wanted them to suffer the way he had suffered, to experience the complete destruction of everything they had worked to build. So instead of reporting the embezzlement, Robert had allowed it to continue while building an even more devastating case against them. Using his security company's resources, he had documented every meeting, every transaction, every lie they had told. He had recordings of their conversations, photographs of their activities, and a complete financial trail of their crimes. But the real genius of Robert's plan wasn't the evidence he had gathered, it was the evidence he had planted. Over the past month, Robert had been carefully manipulating the crime scene to tell a different story. Using his access to Kyle's computer and Diana's phone, he had planted communications that suggested a much darker plot. Emails discussing eliminating the problem and making sure he can't hurt us. Text messages about permanent solutions and removing obstacles. Financial records showing payments to individuals with criminal backgrounds. To an outside observer, it would appear that Diana, Trevor, and Kyle had conspired not just to steal Robert's money, but to murder him. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Robert would disappear for several days, leaving behind evidence of a struggle and traces of blood. Security cameras would show Diana and Kyle returning to the house at suspicious times. Financial records would reveal that they had been planning to inherit his business and life insurance. When the police began investigating, they would uncover what appeared to be a murder plot gone wrong. But Robert's masterstroke was Kyle's role in the deception. The boy had no idea that his communications were being monitored, that his computer was compromised, or that his father had been documenting his every betrayal. When the police questioned him, Kyle would inevitably lie to protect his mother, making himself an accessory to what appeared to be a murder conspiracy. Saturday morning, Robert put his plan into motion. He staged a struggle in his home office, complete with overturned furniture and strategically placed bloodstains. He activated the security system to record the scene, then disabled it to suggest tampering. He left his car in the garage but took his motorcycle, a vehicle that few people knew he owned, hidden in a storage unit across town. By Saturday evening, Robert was positioned in a surveillance hide overlooking the mountain cabin, watching through night vision equipment as Diana and Trevor enjoyed what they believed would be their last weekend before starting their new life together. They had no idea that their hunter was watching, that their every move was being recorded, or that they had walked into a trap months in the making. Sunday would bring the first phase of their destruction. Monday would bring the police, the arrests, and the beginning of their nightmare. By Tuesday, the entire community would know the truth about Diana Sullivan and her lover, that they were thieves, conspirators, and suspected murderers. But Robert's revenge was just beginning. The legal system would handle their crimes, but Robert Sullivan had his own justice to dispense. He had spent months learning their weaknesses, their fears, their deepest secrets. Before this was over, they would understand that betraying Robert Sullivan was the worst mistake of their lives. As he watched them through his scope, Robert felt no satisfaction, no anger, no regret. He felt only the cold certainty of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. The hunt was nearly over, but the real punishment was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Arrest. Robert arrived home Monday evening to find 2 police cruisers parked in his driveway, their red and blue lights painting his perfect suburban facade in harsh, rotating colors. His neighbors had gathered on their lawns and porches, drawn by the spectacle of law enforcement in their quiet, exclusive neighborhood. He parked his motorcycle in the garage and walked calmly toward his front door, his expression carefully neutral despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was the moment he had been planning for months. Detective Maria Santos stepped forward as Robert approached, her hand resting on her service weapon. She was a 15-year veteran of the force, known for her methodical approach to investigations and her unwillingness to be intimidated by wealth or status. Behind her stood her partner, Detective Frank Morrison, along with 2 uniformed officers. Robert Sullivan? Detective Santos asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. Yes, that's me. Is there a problem, Detective? You are under arrest for the murder of your son, Kyle Sullivan, she announced, her voice carrying across the evening air to the assembled neighbors. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Robert's performance was flawless. His face registered exactly the right amount of shock and confusion, his body language conveying the bewilderment of an innocent man facing an impossible accusation. That's impossible, he said, his voice rising just enough to sound genuinely distressed. My son is at football camp. He's been there since Friday. You can call his coach, call the school. Detective Santos continued reading his rights while Detective Morrison moved to handcuff him. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. As the cold metal closed around his wrists, Robert caught sight of Diana's BMW pulling into the driveway. His wife emerged from the car, her face pale with shock and fear. She was returning from her supposed spa weekend, though Robert knew she had actually spent the last 3 days at the mountain cabin with Trevor. Her appearance was perfectly timed. She would arrive just as the police were arresting her husband, creating the perfect alibi for herself while appearing to be an innocent victim of circumstances. Robert, Diana called out, rushing toward them. What's happening? Why are they arresting you? Detective Santos turned to face Diana, her expression grim. Mrs. Sullivan, we need to speak with you about your son Kyle. I'm afraid we have some very serious news. The color drained from Diana's face, and for a moment, Robert almost believed her performance. She was good at deception. He had to give her that. Kyle? What about Kyle? He's at football camp. I just spoke to him yesterday. Ma'am, we found evidence suggesting that your son has been murdered, Detective Morrison announced bluntly. We have reason to believe your husband was involved in his death. Diana's knees buckled, and she caught herself against the hood of her car. No, she whispered, then louder. No, that's not possible. Kyle is alive. He has to be alive. Robert would never hurt our son. There's been some terrible mistake. Robert watched his wife's performance with cold admiration. If he hadn't known the truth, he might have been convinced by her apparent anguish. But he knew that every tear, every sob, every protestation of his innocence was calculated to protect herself and her lover. That's when Helen Rodriguez, their neighbor from across the street, came forward. Mrs. Rodriguez was 73 years old, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. She was known for her sharp mind, her attention to detail, and her habit of observing everything that happened on their quiet street. "Officers," Mrs. Rodriguez called out, walking briskly toward them despite her age. "Officers, there's something you need to know." Detective Santos looked annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a crime scene." "But that's just it," Mrs. Rodriguez insisted. "It's not a crime scene, not the way you think. I saw Kyle Sullivan this morning. He was alive, and he was leaving this house with a suitcase." The statement hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Diana gasped. Robert's eyes widened in apparent confusion, and both detectives stopped what they were doing to focus on the elderly woman. "Ma'am, are you certain about what you saw?" Detective Santos asked carefully. "Absolutely certain. I was watering my garden around 7:30 this morning when I saw Kyle come out of the Sullivan house. He was carrying a large suitcase and a backpack. He got into a blue sedan that was waiting for him at the curb. I thought it was strange because the car wasn't one I recognized, and Kyle looked nervous, like he was in a hurry." Detective Morrison pulled out his notebook. "Can you describe the driver of the car?" It was too far away to see clearly, but it appeared to be a man with dark hair. The car had out-of-state plates, though I couldn't make out the numbers. The revelation created chaos. If Kyle was alive and had left the house that morning, then the entire basis for Robert's arrest crumbled. But more importantly, it raised questions about who had provided the police with evidence of Kyle's supposed murder. Detective Santos stepped closer to Mrs. Rodriguez. "Ma'am, did you tell anyone else about seeing Kyle this morning?" "Well, no. I didn't think it was important until just now. Should I have?" Robert felt a cold satisfaction as he watched the confusion spread across the faces of the officers. This was exactly what he had planned. Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony would create reasonable doubt about Kyle's death, but it would also raise new questions about the evidence the police had received. "Detective," Robert said quietly, "if my son is alive, then who called in this murder report? And why does someone want you to think I killed him?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Detective Santos and her partner exchanged glances, both realizing that their case had just become infinitely more complicated. They had acted on what appeared to be solid evidence: photographs of a crime scene, bloodstains, signs of struggle, and most damning, communications suggesting a murder plot. But if Kyle was alive, then someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame Robert Sullivan. Diana stepped forward, her voice shaking with what appeared to be relief and confusion. "If Kyle is alive, where is he? Why would he leave like that? And who would try to frame Robert?" But even as she spoke, Robert could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was beginning to realize that someone had orchestrated this entire scenario, someone who knew about her affair, her theft, her plans to disappear. Someone who had been watching and planning while she thought she was in control. As the detectives conferred in hushed tones, discussing whether to release Robert or continue with the arrest, Robert allowed himself a small smile. The trap was working perfectly. Diana and Trevor had no idea that their nightmare was just beginning, that every move they made from this point forward would only tighten the noose around their necks. The real game was about to begin. Chapter 5: The Hunter Revealed. 24 hours later, Robert sat in the conference room of the police station, his expensive attorney by his side, watching as Detectives Santos and Morrison laid out the evidence that had led to his arrest. The walls of the room seemed to close in as they displayed photographs of his home office. Overturned furniture, blood spatter on the walls, signs of a violent struggle. But Robert's expression remained impassive, that of a man trying to understand how his world had collapsed overnight. The anonymous tip came in Sunday evening, Detective Santos explained, spreading crime scene photos across the table. The caller claimed to have witnessed suspicious activity at your home and provided specific details about evidence we would find. Robert's attorney, David Chun, leaned forward. "What kind of details?" "The location of bloodstains, the position of overturned furniture, even the hiding place of what appeared to be Kyle's torn clothing. Detective Morrison pulled out an evidence bag containing a football jersey with what looked like blood on it. The caller knew things that only someone present during a violent crime would know. Or someone who staged the scene, David Chin replied smoothly. Detective, my client has cooperated fully with your investigation. He submitted to questioning without hesitation, provided DNA samples, allowed you to search his property. The evidence points to an elaborate frame job, not a murder. Detective Santos nodded reluctantly. The witness testimony from Mrs. Rodriguez certainly complicates our timeline. If Kyle was alive Monday morning, then the crime scene was either staged or what, Detective? Robert spoke for the first time in an hour, his voice controlled and measured. Or your son was involved in staging his own disappearance. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the room. If Kyle had faked his own death to frame his father, it suggested a level of deception and malice that went far beyond a typical family dispute. But Robert had anticipated this possibility, had planned for the moment when the investigation would begin to uncover the deeper conspiracy. Detective, Robert said quietly, I think there's something you need to know about my family. Something I've been too ashamed to discuss until now. David Chin shot his client a warning look, but Robert continued. 3 months ago, I discovered that my wife was having an affair with Trevor Walsh, her attorney. I hired a private investigator to document their relationship because I was considering divorce proceedings. Detective Santos leaned forward, her interest piqued. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I was protecting my son. I thought Kyle was just caught in the middle of his parents' marital problems. I didn't realize. Robert paused, as if struggling with the words. I didn't realize that he was actively involved in helping his mother deceive me. Involved how? Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I have documentation showing that Kyle has been providing information about my business activities to his mother, who has been passing it along to Trevor Walsh. Financial records show that they've been systematically stealing from my company for months. The folder contained everything Robert had carefully compiled over the past 3 months. Bank records, email communications, surveillance photographs, financial transfers. All of it real, all of it damning, and all of it leading to one inescapable conclusion. Diana, Trevor, and Kyle had been working together to destroy him. Detective Morrison examined the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Mr. Sullivan, are you saying that your wife and son conspired to steal from you? I'm saying that when I confronted Kyle about his involvement last Friday, he became agitated and accused me of trying to destroy his mother. He said I would never have the chance to hurt them again. That was the last time I saw him. The lie was perfectly crafted, impossible to disprove, and designed to shift suspicion away from Robert while simultaneously implicating his betrayers. By admitting to knowledge of the affair and the theft, Robert appeared to be a victim coming forward with painful truths. The fact that Kyle had disappeared immediately after their supposed confrontation suggested that the boy was either running from consequences or preparing to take more drastic action. Detective Santos, David Chin interjected, my client has been the victim of a sophisticated conspiracy. His wife and son have been systematically stealing from him while planning to frame him for murder. I believe Kyle's disappearance is part of a larger plan to make my client appear guilty while the real perpetrators escape justice. Detective Santos studied the documents, her mind processing the implications. Mr. Sullivan, do you believe your wife and Trevor Walsh are involved in your son's disappearance? Robert's answer was carefully measured. I believe my son has been manipulated by people he trusted. Whether he's a willing participant or another victim, I can't say. But I know that Trevor Walsh has been planning to leave the country with my wife, and they have access to millions of dollars stolen from my business accounts. The revelation hit the detectives like a sledgehammer. What had appeared to be a simple domestic murder case was evolving into something far more complex, a web of adultery, theft, conspiracy, and possibly kidnapping. The evidence suggested that Robert Sullivan wasn't a killer, but rather the target of an elaborate scheme designed to destroy him financially and legally. We'll need to verify these financial records, Detective Morrison said, gathering the documents. And we'll want to speak with Mr. Walsh immediately. Good luck finding him, Robert replied grimly. According to his law firm, he took an unexpected vacation yesterday and can't be reached. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? As the detectives prepared to leave, Robert played his final card. Detective Santos, there's something else. I have security footage from my home that might be relevant to your investigation. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I only discovered it this morning. My security system has a backup server that I had forgotten about. It contains footage from the past week, including Saturday morning when I was supposedly killing my son. The security footage was Robert's masterpiece, carefully edited to show Kyle leaving the house alone on Saturday morning, nervous and furtive, carrying luggage as if preparing for a long trip. The timestamp showed that Robert had already left for work, providing him with a perfect alibi while making Kyle appear to be acting independently. More importantly, the footage would lead investigators to examine Kyle's recent activities, his communications with his mother and Trevor, and his involvement in the theft from his father's business. Every thread they pulled would lead them deeper into the conspiracy, further away from Robert, and closer to the truth he wanted them to find. As Robert and his attorney left the police station, David Chin couldn't shake the feeling that his client had been holding back crucial information. Robert, is there anything else you haven't told me? Any other evidence or complications I should know about? Robert smiled for the first time in days, the expression cold and predatory. David, there's something you need to understand about me. I spent 22 years in special operations, hunting people who thought they were smarter than me. I've dealt with terrorists, war criminals, and enemy agents who had years to plan their operations. Did you really think my cheating wife and her lawyer boyfriend could outmaneuver me? The attorney felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that Robert Sullivan wasn't just a victim of betrayal. He was a predator who had been hunting his prey from the very beginning. The question wasn't whether Diana and Trevor would be caught, but whether they would survive what Robert had planned for them. The hunt was entering its final phase, and Robert Sullivan had never lost a hunt. Chapter 6. The Noose Tightens. Trevor Walsh's penthouse apartment in downtown's financial district had always been his sanctuary, a glass and steel monument to his success as one of the city's most prominent attorneys. But as he paced across the polished hardwood floors Tuesday morning, the space felt more like a prison. His hands shook as he poured his third cup of coffee, his mind racing through the implications of Robert Sullivan's arrest and the increasingly dangerous situation he found himself in. Diana sat curled on his leather sofa, still wearing the clothes she had thrown on when the police arrived at her house the previous evening. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her makeup smeared from tears and stress. She had driven straight to Trevor's apartment after giving her statement to the police, and neither of them had slept. "This doesn't make sense," Diana said for the 10th time that morning. "Robert couldn't have killed Kyle. He loves that boy more than anything in the world. And Mrs. Rodriguez saw Kyle alive yesterday morning. So where is he?" Trevor stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression grim. "Diana, we need to consider the possibility that Kyle is playing a game we don't understand. Think about it. He's been helping us, feeding us information about his father's business, covering for our meetings. What if he decided to take things further? You're suggesting that Kyle framed his own father for murder?" Diana's voice rose in disbelief. "He's 16 years old, Trevor. He's not capable of something like that, isn't he?" Trevor pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. "Look at these texts from Kyle over the past month. He's been asking increasingly detailed questions about legal procedures, about evidence collection, about how to make financial transfers without leaving traces. I thought he was just curious about the law, but what if he was planning something?" Diana read through the messages, her face growing pale. Kyle's questions had indeed become more sophisticated and specific over time. He had asked about statute of limitations for various crimes, about how DNA evidence was collected and processed, about international banking laws and extradition treaties. For a teenager, his interests were unusually focused on criminal law and evidence. But why would he want to hurt Robert? Diana asked weakly. "He's been helping us, working against his father. Why would he suddenly turn and try to destroy him?" Trevor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but he answered anyway, hoping for news about Kyle's whereabouts. "Trevor Walsh," he said cautiously. "Mr. Walsh, this is Detective Morrison from the Metropolitan Police. We need to speak with you immediately regarding the Kyle Sullivan case." Trevor felt his stomach drop. "Of course, Detective. I'm happy to help in any way I can. We'll need you to come down to the station this afternoon for questioning. We have some financial records and communications we'd like you to review." After ending the call, Trevor turned to Diana with a look of growing panic. They want to question me about financial records. Diana, if they found evidence of our business relationship with Kyle, if they know about the money transfers. What money transfers? Diana's voice was barely a whisper. Trevor realized his mistake immediately. In his panic, he had revealed something he had never told Diana, that Kyle had been receiving payments for the information he provided about his father's business. What had started as small gifts for helping out had evolved into substantial sums, paid into accounts that Kyle had opened without his parents' knowledge. Trevor, what money transfers? Diana repeated, her voice growing stronger and more demanding. Reluctantly, Trevor opened his laptop and pulled up the financial records he had been hoping to hide. Over the past 4 months, he had paid Kyle Sullivan a total of $47,000 through a series of wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. The payments were documented as research consulting, but were actually bribes for inside information about Robert's business operations. Diana stared at the screen in shock. You've been paying my son to spy on his father? $47,000. Diana, you have to understand, Kyle came to me with the idea. He said he wanted to help us, wanted to make sure we had enough money to start fresh together. He offered to provide information about Robert's business deals, his client list, his security protocols. It seemed harmless at the time. Harmless. Diana's voice was shrill now. You turned my son into a criminal. You corrupted him, made him complicit in our affair, involved him in stealing from his father. How could you think any of this was harmless? But even as she accused Trevor, Diana was beginning to understand the true scope of their situation. Kyle hadn't been an innocent victim caught between his parents. He had been an active participant in their conspiracy. More troubling, he had been smart enough to secure his own financial future while doing it. Trevor's laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was listed as K. Sullivan, Consulting, an address neither of them had seen before. The subject line read, Time to pay the price. With trembling fingers, Trevor opened the message. Trevor and Diana, by now you've realized that everything has gone wrong. Robert knows about the affair, the police are investigating the theft, and I'm nowhere to be found. You're probably wondering how this happened, how your perfect plan fell apart so completely. The answer is simple. You trusted the wrong person. I've been working with my father for months, feeding him information about your activities, your plans, your weaknesses. Every secret you shared with me, every detail about your relationship, every piece of information about your financial arrangements, all of it went straight to him. You thought you were using me to spy on him, but he was using me to spy on you. The money you paid me? He knows about every transfer. The offshore accounts? He has the access codes. The evidence you think implicates him? He planted all of it. You played a game against a master strategist and lost before you even realized you were playing. Don't bother trying to find me. I'm somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never reach, with enough money to start a new life far away from both of you. In a few years, when the legal proceedings are over and you're both in prison, maybe I'll send you a postcard. Oh, and Diana, Dad says to tell you that he never forgives betrayal. Never. Goodbye, Kyle. The email hit them like a physical blow. Diana collapsed back onto the sofa, her body shaking with the realization of how completely they had been manipulated. Trevor stared at the screen, his legal mind racing through the implications of what Kyle had revealed. Robert Sullivan hadn't been the victim of their conspiracy. He had been the architect of their destruction. While they thought they were planning his downfall, he had been several steps ahead, using their own son as a weapon against them. Every move they had made, every decision they had reached, had been guided by information Kyle had provided, information that came directly from Robert. We have to run, Trevor said suddenly. We have to get out of the country now, before they arrest us for theft, conspiracy, fraud. God knows what else they'll charge us with. But Diana wasn't listening. She was thinking about the past 6 months, reviewing every conversation with Kyle, every piece of advice he had given, every suggestion he had made. The mountain cabin where they had planned their weekend getaway, Kyle had recommended it. The financial advisors who had helped them set up offshore accounts, Kyle had provided their contacts. The timing of their activities, the methods they had used to hide their affair, even the hotel where they had first been intimate, all of it influenced by Kyle's innocent-seeming suggestions. They hadn't been planning Robert's destruction. They had been dancing to his tune from the very beginning. It's too late to run, Diana said quietly. Don't you understand? He's been planning this for months. He knows where we would go, what resources we have, how we would try to escape. This isn't about justice or revenge. This is about total annihilation. As if summoned by her words, Trevor's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Robert Sullivan's name. With trembling hands, Trevor answered the call, putting it on speaker so Diana could hear. "Hello, Trevor." Robert's voice was calm and controlled, almost friendly. "I trust you received Kyle's message." "Robert, listen to me," Trevor began, but Robert cut him off. "No, you listen to me. You stole from me, you corrupted my son, and you destroyed my marriage. But more than that, you underestimated me. That was your fatal mistake. What do you want?" Diana asked, her voice hollow. "I want you to understand that your nightmare is just beginning. The police will arrest you both within the hour. The evidence of your crimes is overwhelming, and there's no escape. But that's just the legal consequences. I have something much more personal planned for you." "Robert, please," Diana pleaded. "Whatever you're planning, Kyle is involved too. He's your son. Don't destroy him to get revenge on us." Robert's laugh was cold and humorless. "Diana, you still don't understand. Kyle chose his side months ago when he decided to betray me for money. He's safe, comfortable, and well-funded in a location where you'll never find him. But he's also dead to me, just like you are." The line went dead, leaving Trevor and Diana alone with the crushing weight of their situation. Outside the penthouse windows, they could see police cars pulling into the building's parking garage. Robert Sullivan's war was almost over, and he had won decisively. But for his enemies, the real punishment was just beginning. Chapter 7. Checkmate. The Metropolitan Police Department's interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams. Diana Sullivan sat across from Detective Santos, her hands trembling as she tried to process the magnitude of evidence arrayed against her. 24 hours had passed since Trevor's arrest, and the walls were closing in with mathematical precision. "Mrs. Sullivan," Detective Santos began, spreading financial documents across the metal table. "We've traced over $2 million in fraudulent transfers from your husband's business accounts to offshore holdings controlled by you and Trevor Walsh. Would you like to explain how this money found its way into your possession?" Diana stared at the papers, recognizing transactions she had authorized months ago under Kyle's guidance. At the time, her son had explained them as legitimate business expenses, part of a complex financial strategy that would protect their assets during the divorce proceedings. Now she understood they were evidence of systematic theft, carefully documented and preserved to ensure her destruction. I thought they were legitimate business transfers," Diana said weakly. "Kyle explained that his father was planning to hide assets, and that we needed to protect ourselves legally." Detective Morrison, seated beside his partner, leaned forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, your son has been cooperating with your husband's investigation for months. Every conversation you had with Kyle about these financial matters was recorded. Every instruction you gave him, every plan you discussed, every crime you committed, all of it documented with audio and video evidence." The detective activated a digital recorder, and Diana's own voice filled the room. "Kyle, honey, did you get the account numbers from your father's office? Good. Now, Trevor needs you to transfer another $100,000 to the Cayman account, but make sure it looks like a consulting fee for the Morrison project. Can you handle that for Mommy?" Diana closed her eyes as her voice continued, detailing months of financial crimes she had committed with Kyle's assistance. What she had thought were private conversations between mother and son had actually been carefully orchestrated sessions designed to build an ironclad criminal case against her. The penalty for conspiracy to commit fraud at this level is 15 to 20 years in federal prison, Detective Santos continued. Add in the charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Yes, Mrs. Sullivan, we know about the plan to eliminate your husband, and you're looking at life in prison. Murder? Diana's eyes snapped open. I never planned to murder anyone. This is insane. Detective Morrison pulled out another set of documents. These are communications between you and Trevor Walsh discussing permanent solutions to your Robert problem. We have recordings of conversations where you discussed hiring someone to take care of things and make sure your husband couldn't hurt you anymore. Diana recognized the phrases, but the context had been completely distorted. Those conversations had been about divorce proceedings, about hiring attorneys and financial advisors to protect themselves legally. But presented as evidence in a criminal investigation, they sounded like assassination plans. You don't understand, Diana protested. Those conversations were taken out of context. We were talking about legal strategies, not violence. Were you talking about legal strategies when you paid Marcus Thompson $50,000 last month? Detective Santos asked, sliding a photograph across the table. The picture showed Diana handing an envelope to a man she had never seen before. But she recognized the location. It was taken outside the coffee shop where she had met with her private investigator to discuss gathering evidence for divorce proceedings. Somehow, the legitimate investigation she had commissioned had been reframed as payment to a hired killer. I don't know who that man is, Diana said desperately. I was meeting with a private investigator named Jennifer Chun. Check your records. She's licensed, legitimate, completely legal. Detective Morrison shook his head. Jennifer Chun doesn't exist, Mrs. Sullivan. The license number you have belongs to a Marcus Thompson, a convicted felon with ties to organized crime. Mr. Thompson has already been arrested and has agreed to testify about the contract you placed on your husband's life. The room spun around Diana as she realized the full scope of Robert's manipulation. Every person she had trusted, every professional she had hired, every ally she thought she had secured, all of them had been Robert's agents, leading her deeper into a web of incrimination. This is impossible, she whispered. Robert couldn't have planned all of this. He couldn't have known. Known what, Mrs. Sullivan? That you were cheating on him? That you were stealing from him? That you were planning to disappear with his money? Detective Santos's voice was relentless. Your husband is a former Special Forces operator who spent decades hunting people who thought they were smarter than him. Did you really think you could outsmart a man trained in psychological warfare and tactical deception? As Diana struggled to comprehend her situation, Trevor Walsh was facing his own reckoning 3 floors below. His interrogation had been brutal and efficient, with FBI agents presenting evidence of financial crimes spanning multiple states and federal jurisdictions. Agent Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of white-collar crime investigations, laid out Trevor's financial records with surgical precision. Mr. Walsh, you've been embezzling money from your law firm's client accounts to fund your relationship with Diana Sullivan. You've been using privileged information obtained through your affair to manipulate stock trades and insider transactions. You've been laundering money through Caribbean shell companies and planning to flee the country to avoid prosecution. Trevor's expensive attorney sat silently beside him, knowing that the evidence was overwhelming and the situation hopeless. Every financial transaction, every communication, every crime had been documented with meticulous detail. There was no defense, no explanation, no escape. The interesting part, Agent Williams continued, is that you thought you were being clever, using Kyle Sullivan as your inside source. What you didn't realize is that Kyle was feeding you information provided by his father. Every secret he shared with you, every piece of insider knowledge he offered, every strategic advantage he gave you, all of it came from Robert Sullivan. Trevor's face went pale as the implications hit him. You're saying Robert wanted us to steal from him? I'm saying Robert wanted you to think you were stealing from him while he was actually controlling every aspect of your criminal enterprise. He provided the targets, the methods, the opportunities, and the evidence. You weren't committing crimes against him. You were committing crimes for him. The agent pulled out a thick folder labeled Operation Endgame. Inside were surveillance photos, audio transcripts, financial records, and detailed timelines showing how Robert had orchestrated every aspect of Trevor and Diana's downfall. Your affair began 8 months ago, but Mr. Sullivan knew about it within 2 weeks. Instead of confronting you, he decided to use your relationship as a weapon against you. Every romantic getaway you took, every intimate moment you shared, every plan you made together, all of it was monitored, recorded, and used to build the case against you. Trevor stared at the evidence of his manipulation, understanding for the first time that he had never been in control of anything. His affair with Diana, his financial crimes, his plans to escape the country, all of it had been orchestrated by Robert Sullivan with the precision of a military operation. He destroyed us before we even knew we were under attack, Trevor said quietly. Agent Williams nodded. Robert Sullivan is what we call a hunter-killer, someone who identifies threats and eliminates them with extreme prejudice. You made the mistake of betraying a man who spent 22 years hunting terrorists and enemy operatives. This was never a fair fight. As both interrogations continued, Robert Sullivan sat in his study, watching live feeds from the police station on his secure computer system. His contacts in law enforcement had provided him with access to the interrogation rooms, allowing him to observe his enemy's final moments of freedom. Kyle entered the room carrying 2 glasses of whiskey, his demeanor calm and confident despite being supposedly missing. Father and son had been together since the beginning, planning their enemy's destruction with military precision. How long before they break completely? Kyle asked, handing his father a drink. Robert smiled, the expression cold and predatory. Diana will confess within the hour, hoping for a plea deal that will never come. Trevor will hold out longer, but his attorney will eventually convince him that cooperation is his only option. And then they'll spend the next 20 to 30 years in federal prison, completely cut off from the outside world, with nothing but time to think about the consequences of betraying us. Kyle raised his glass in a toast. To justice served. Robert clinked his glass against his son's, but his expression remained grim. Kyle, you need to understand something. What we did to them was necessary, but it doesn't mean I trust you again. You helped them for months before coming to me. That betrayal is something I won't forget. Kyle's smile faded as he realized that even he wasn't safe from his father's unforgiving nature. Robert Sullivan truly never forgave betrayal, even from his own son. The war was over, but Robert Sullivan's justice was absolute and eternal. Chapter 8. The Final Truth. 6 months after Diana and Trevor's arrests, Robert Sullivan stood in the empty shell of what had once been his family home. The government had seized the property as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings, and everything inside had been sold to compensate his business partners for the millions stolen through the conspiracy. He walked through the rooms where he had lived for 12 years, his footsteps echoing in the hollow spaces that had once held his life. Kyle appeared in the doorway of what had been his bedroom, no longer the fresh-faced teenager who had played high school football. 6 months of living with the truth had aged him, hardened him, made him into something darker. He carried a duffel bag and wore clothes that suggested he was preparing for another departure. The new identities are ready, Kyle announced. Joshua Anderson and Michael Anderson, father and son, with complete histories and documentation. The house in Montana is purchased and waiting. We can disappear completely if you want. Robert nodded, but his attention was focused on a framed photograph that had somehow survived the asset seizure. A picture of him, Diana, and Kyle taken during a family vacation 2 years earlier. They were smiling, arms around each other, the perfect image of domestic happiness. It was all a lie, but for a moment, Robert remembered what it had felt like to believe in that lie. Do you regret it? Kyle asked quietly. Which part? Destroying your mother and her lover? Exposing their crimes? Or discovering that my own son is as ruthless as I am? Kyle set down his bag and moved closer to his father. I regret that it came to this. I regret that Mom forced us to choose sides. But I don't regret choosing you. Robert turned to face his son, studying the young man who had helped him orchestrate the most complex revenge operation of his career. Kyle had played his role perfectly, convincing Diana and Trevor that he was their willing accomplice, while secretly recording their conversations and documenting their crimes. He had demonstrated a natural talent for deception and manipulation that both impressed and disturbed his father. Tell me the truth, Kyle. When did you decide to betray your mother? Kyle was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. I never decided to betray her. I decided to choose the winning side. Explain. I knew about the affair for months before you confronted me. I watched Mom lie to you every day, watched her steal from your business, watched her plan to destroy you and take everything you'd worked for. I had 2 choices. Help her and hope she would take care of me, or help you and know that you would. Robert felt a mixture of pride and revulsion at his son's cold calculation. So you chose me because you thought I was more likely to win? I chose you because you're Robert Sullivan. You're the man who survived 22 years in special operations, who built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing, who never lost a battle in his entire life. Mom is smart and beautiful, but she's not a warrior. Trevor is clever and sophisticated, but he's not a killer. You are. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Robert had created his son in his own image, teaching him to be ruthless and unforgiving, to choose loyalty based on strength rather than emotion. But he had never expected Kyle to apply those lessons to his own family. What about love, Kyle? What about family loyalty? What about the bond between mother and son? Kyle's laugh was bitter and humorless. Love? Mom loved Trevor more than she loved us. Family loyalty? She was planning to take me away from you and disappear to another country. The bond between mother and son? She turned me into a criminal to fund her affair. Robert studied his son's face, looking for any sign of remorse or regret. He found none. Kyle had made his choice with the same cold calculation that Robert himself would have used, weighing costs and benefits, risks and rewards, loyalty and betrayal. There's something else, Kyle continued. Something I haven't told you about Mom and Trevor's plan. Robert raised an eyebrow, interested despite himself. They weren't just planning to steal your money and disappear. They were planning to kill you. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Despite everything he had discovered about Diana's betrayal, despite the evidence of her theft and lies, he had never truly believed she was capable of murder. Kyle pulled out a smartphone and activated a recording app. I recorded this conversation 3 weeks before you confronted me about the affair. Listen. Diana's voice filled the empty room, clear and unmistakable. Trevor, we need to face reality. Robert is never going to give me a divorce with enough money to start over. And if he discovers what we've been doing, he'll destroy us both. We need a permanent solution. Trevor's response was equally clear. Diana, you're talking about murder. I'm an attorney, not a killer. You're a man who wants to spend the rest of his life with me. Robert stands in the way of that. We have enough money now to make this problem disappear permanently. Marcus Thompson has contacts who can handle situations like this. How much would something like that cost? $500,000. A small price to pay for our freedom. Robert listened to the recording with growing fury, realizing that Diana's betrayal had been even more complete than he had imagined. She hadn't just stolen his money and corrupted his son. She had been planning his murder. When was this recorded? Robert asked quietly. 2 days before you approached me about helping you gather evidence against them. If you hadn't acted when you did, they would have killed you within the month. Robert felt the last vestiges of his emotional attachment to Diana dissolve completely. Whatever love he had once felt for her, whatever hope he had harbored for reconciliation, was replaced by cold satisfaction at her destruction. They're in federal prison now, Robert said. Diana in Texas, Trevor in Colorado. Maximum security, no possibility of parole for 25 years. They'll never see each other again, never touch each other again, never be free again. Is that enough? Kyle asked. Robert considered the question carefully. Diana and Trevor had lost everything. Their freedom, their money, their reputations, their future. They would spend the next quarter century in concrete boxes, surrounded by violent criminals, forgotten by the world they had once inhabited. It was a living hell that would last until they died. Yes, Robert said finally. It's enough. Kyle picked up his duffel bag and headed toward the door. The plane leaves in 3 hours. Are you ready to start over? Robert took one last look around the house that had once been his home, then followed his son toward the exit. As they walked through the front door, he noticed a car parked across the street with 2 occupants watching them. Federal agents, most likely, keeping surveillance on the family members of convicted felons. They'll follow us, Kyle observed. Let them, Robert replied. We're not running from anything. We're just starting fresh. As they drove away from the house, Robert reflected on the past year and the choices he had made. He had destroyed his wife and her lover completely, using their own son as the weapon of their destruction. He had proven that betrayal carried consequences that lasted a lifetime. He had shown that Robert Sullivan was not a man to be crossed. But in winning his war, he had also lost something essential. His family was gone, his home was gone, his old life was gone. He had saved his son from his enemies, but in doing so, he had turned Kyle into something as cold and calculating as himself. The price of revenge, Robert realized, was becoming the very thing you were fighting against. As they drove toward the airport and their new life, Robert Sullivan felt no satisfaction, no joy, no sense of victory. He felt only the hollow emptiness of a man who had won everything and lost everything at the same time. Behind them, the house that had once held his dreams disappeared into the distance. Just another casualty of a war that nobody truly wins. Chapter 9, Legacy of Ashes. 5 years later, Michael Anderson stood on the deck of his ranch house in the mountains of Montana, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. The man who had once been Robert Sullivan had built a quiet life in this remote valley, far from the world that had known him as a successful businessman and decorated veteran. His neighbors knew him as a retired security consultant who valued his privacy, and they respected the boundaries he had established around his property. The ranch was self-sufficient, with solar panels, a well-stocked generator, and enough supplies to last through the harsh mountain winters. Robert had designed it like a fortress, with security systems that would make most government facilities envious. But from the outside, it looked like nothing more than a prosperous rancher's homestead. Joshua Anderson, the young man who had once been Kyle Sullivan, emerged from the barn where he had been tending to their horses. At 21, he had grown into a tall, lean man with his father's calculating eyes and his mother's unsettling charm. He had completed his education through online programs, earning degrees in business and computer science while maintaining their cover identities with meticulous care. The monthly reports came in, Joshua announced, handing his father a secure tablet. Diana's psychiatric evaluations show continued deterioration. 3 suicide attempts in the past year, complete social isolation, and what the doctors describe as severe dissociative episodes. Robert scrolled through the medical reports that his contacts in the federal prison system provided monthly. Diana had not adapted well to incarceration. The woman who had once been the toast of the country club social scene had become a broken shell, spending most of her time in protective custody to prevent her from harming herself or others. And Trevor, worse in some ways. He's maintained his sanity, but it's made his suffering more acute. He understands exactly what he's lost and exactly how much time he has left to serve. The other inmates know he's a former lawyer, which makes his life difficult. Robert felt no satisfaction at these reports. The destruction of his enemies had been necessary, but it brought him no joy. Diana and Trevor were paying the price for their betrayal, but their suffering couldn't restore what they had taken from him: his faith in family, his belief in loyalty, his ability to trust. There's something else, Joshua continued, his voice carefully neutral. I've been monitoring communications from our old neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez passed away last month. Robert looked up from the tablet, surprised by the news. Helen Rodriguez had been the neighbor whose testimony had unraveled his carefully constructed arrest, revealing that Kyle was alive and destroying the murder charges against him. Her intervention had been crucial to the success of his plan, though she had never known the role she was playing. Natural causes? Heart attack in her sleep. She was 81. The obituary mentioned that she was known for her keen observation skills and her willingness to speak up for justice. Robert set down the tablet and walked to the edge of the deck, looking out over the valley that had become his sanctuary. Mrs. Rodriguez had been a good woman, an honest woman, someone who had told the truth when it mattered. In his old life, he would have attended her funeral, would have paid his respects to her family, would have honored the memory of a neighbor who had done the right thing. But Michael Anderson had no connection to Helen Rodriguez. Robert Sullivan was dead, erased as completely as Diana's dreams and Trevor's ambitions. Do you ever think about going back? Joshua asked, joining his father at the railing. Back to what? There's nothing left of our old life. The business was sold to pay restitution. The house was seized by the government. Our friends and colleagues believe we're either dead or fled the country. Even if we could return, what would be the point? Joshua was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been haunting both of them for years. Do you think it was worth it? Everything we did, everything we lost, everything we became. Robert considered his answer carefully. Their revenge had been complete and devastating. Diana and Trevor would spend the rest of their lives in prison, their reputations destroyed, their families shamed, their dreams turned to ash. Justice had been served with mathematical precision, and their betrayal had been punished beyond their worst nightmares. But the cost had been enormous. Robert had lost his identity, his home, his business, and his place in the world. He had turned his son into an accomplice and co-conspirator, corrupting Kyle's innocence in service of their shared vengeance. They had saved themselves from their enemies, but in doing so, they had become something darker than the people they had destroyed. I think, Robert said slowly, that some choices don't have right or wrong answers. They just have consequences. And if you had to do it again? If you could go back to that moment when you first discovered the affair? Robert thought about the alternative timeline where he had simply confronted Diana directly, demanded a divorce, and let the legal system handle their crimes. In that world, He might have lost some money and suffered some humiliation, but he would have retained his humanity. Diana and Trevor would have faced consequences, but not the complete annihilation he had orchestrated. In that world, Cal might have grown up to be a normal young man instead of a calculating strategist who viewed relationships as tactical advantages. In that world, Robert might have found love again, might have rebuilt his family, might have created something positive from the ashes of his marriage. But in that world, his enemies would have escaped with lighter consequences, would have kept some of their money, would have had opportunities to rebuild their lives. The betrayal would have been forgiven by time, and justice would have been incomplete. "I would do it again," Robert said finally, because the alternative was letting them win. Joshua nodded, understanding his father's logic even if he questioned its wisdom. They had chosen the path of absolute vengeance, and they would live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of their lives. As the sun climbed higher over the mountains, father and son prepared for another day in their exile. They would tend their ranch, maintain their cover identities, and monitor the slow progression of their enemies' punishment. They would live comfortable, secure lives, protected by wealth hidden in untraceable accounts and identities crafted by the best forgers in the world. But they would live those lives alone, cut off from the world they had once inhabited, bound together by shared secrets and mutual complicity. They had won their war, but victory had cost them everything that made life worth living. In the end, Robert Sullivan had learned the most bitter lesson of all. Revenge is a poison that destroys everyone it touches, including those who dispense it. He had gotten justice, but justice without mercy was just another form of damnation. As they walked back toward the house, Joshua asked one final question. "Do you think they understand why we did it? Do they know that their suffering is the direct result of their choices?" Robert paused at the door, his hand on the handle, and considered the question. Diana and Trevor were probably too broken to understand the elegant justice of their situation. They likely viewed themselves as victims rather than perpetrators, casualties of Robert's cruelty rather than architects of their own destruction. "It doesn't matter what they understand," Robert said quietly. "What matters is that betrayal has consequences, and some sins are unforgivable." With that, he opened the door and disappeared into the house, leaving behind another day in a life built on the ashes of his enemies' dreams. He had kept his promise to himself. He had never forgiven, never forgotten, and never allowed his betrayers to escape justice. But in fulfilling that promise, Robert Sullivan had discovered that perfect revenge was indistinguishable from perfect isolation. He had won everything and lost everything, gained justice and surrendered mercy, achieved victory and embraced emptiness. The war was over, but for Robert Sullivan, peace would never come.